Good morning, everybody. I know we just did this one pretty recently, but in the 6 weeks since I last did this event, Hoch has been pretty much all I thought about as I dig through literally over 1,000 files collected. Making sure I've got everything. Hey, Kathleen. Hey, Jean. All right. Hey, Eileen, Heather, and Tom. Morning, Timothy and Heather. Dodging a divorcee, the first number. Benny Goodman and his orchestra. Hey, Betty and Denise, Timothy. This Benny tune is called Dodging a Divorcee, which is apropos for a Hoch tour. Hey, Octavio, Bridget, and Matt. I'm digging this tune, too. Morning, Matt in Kansas City. Betsy, hell yeah. I'm loving how I look in this thing. Shipped to me directly from Axl Rose's hometown. Morning, Jerry. I decided my new look was going to be the guy from the end of American Pop, the Ralph Bakshi cartoon. Hey, Dina and Becky. Steven, yeah, there'll probably be some new stuff mentioned this morning. Hey, Karen. Hey, Susan. I don't know how new. I covered a lot of stuff yesterday, so... thanks for getting in touch, Marie. Morning, Diane. Hey, Laura and Sue. Hey, Jean. Good morning all around. Hey, Brenda. Morning, Nancy. Hey, Betty. All right, yeah, our place is kind of... Ronnie got the Christmas stuff up while I was out at the movies. Yeah. I'll get the menorah out soon. Hey, Jennifer and Ashley.
Successfully, and we might say rhythmically eluded, Benny Goodman presents John Ward singing The Day I Let You Get
Got
Away.
glitter all over my desk from the decorating, so that's super. Hey, Jennifer. Hey, Emily. I can show you guys all the cats while we're out of here. Just to make sure that they make their appearance. They're presently right here. Priya is in between Miles' legs. Santa hats on the bats, not for me. No. Hey, Cheryl. Jean, no tree yet. 'Tis the season for stress and clutter. Or as Taylor Swift wrote, "'Tis the damn season." Clean the lens a little? Yeah, we can do that. Watch out, folks. Morning, Larry. Yep, nice lazy Sunday morning. After we're done here, I'll probably head straight out to Graceland. Maybe do, it's a good day for coyote pictures, I think. Assuming they're out and about. Hey, Gladys. Yeah, Mom, it's the same time it always is. I didn't realize it was that hazy. Morning, Robert. All right. Morning, Cheryl. Betty, I know the feeling. Hey, Bob. Welcome along, everybody.
Music by Benny Goodman and his orchestra. And the next tune, Sandman.
Melissa, hell yeah. I got a weird notion in my head that I could pull a jacket like this off. It arrived in the mail yesterday. I'm like, damn, pulling it off. And then I'm kind of loving how I look in this thing. This is how historians look now. This one was shipped to me right from Axl Rose's hometown. We've been there on a couple of tours. The boyhood neighborhood of Axl Rose, which looks exactly like you would picture. Morning, Grandma Bell. Yeah, this is Benny Goodman coming to you live from the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago on January 3rd of 1936. Heather, yeah? Oh, no, vintage or old. There was a time when members-only jackets were the least cool thing you could own. Like Hank Hill would rip on members-only jackets. But, no, I like how I look in this. Hey, Lisa, Boker Tov. Ambassador. Morning, Bob. Hope you're feeling well today. Oh yeah, they're still around. Trying to find the color you want is always tricky. It's like with cars. Every car off of the line nowadays is black, white, or silver.
Benny Goodman is playing for you from the Joseph Urban Room of the Congress Hotel in downtown Chicago, and his next tune, Lights Out.
All right, we're going to let Benny do one more tune, then we'll get started here properly. I've been living and breathing Johann Hoch stuff all the last couple of weeks. Usually got 2 or 3 windows open. Plus digging through all of the data. I'm just about to get to Minnie Rankin now. I love working on her. That's a case, man. Like, dig this. Here's a picture I hadn't noticed before. Hoch with the Ambrose Burnside burns. Morning, Todd. I'm actually a little overly warm in a jacket inside, but there's a price for looking rad. Hey, Gail. Hey, Betty. Yeah, Jackie, don't know what to tell you there. Yeah, I love this picture of him. You do a hip, a hop, a hip, you don't stop. Do I have this whole hole in here? Can it be scrolled? No, it's a screenshot. No, it's like they've got him superimposed over another picture of him just standing there looking normal. Morning, Karen. Hey, Chris. Hi, Jan. We are enjoying the hell out of that jam. That brown sugar plum butter. That is terrific. It's interesting. I do find trying to find personal anecdotes about what his various wives were like is really tricky, but over and over you find people say, well, Hoch was just such a handsome, well-dressed man.
Benny Goodman presents his lady of song, Helen Ward, singing Alone.
All right. I'm going to pause before Helen Ward starts singing here because it is time to get started up properly. Welcome along, everybody. All right, welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tours. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. I'm also on TV and the radio all the time and author of about 20 books, so I'm, in fact, incredibly famous. Books include Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, and Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. Now, when it came to figuring out what book to work on next, I got 2 ideas. I got either a follow-up to Graceland that would be about cemeteries in Manhattan, or a follow-up to H.H. Holmes about this other serial killer from approximately the same era, the Mustache years, called Johann Hoch. He was known as the Bluebeard of Chicago, or in the German papers, Blaubart von Chicago. We'll just cover that whole thing. So I know I just did this particular event about 6 weeks ago or so, but since then I've been spending pretty much every day just digging up more data on this guy, organizing the data that I've already got on the guy, which is getting up to about 1,000 pieces at this point. Just a lot of stuff. I've been in the microfilm room about one afternoon a week, getting more and more stuff, and then I have to categorize that stuff. But I wrote a full chapter yesterday, so we're making progress now. Things are starting to pick up. We're gonna have, and if you're on the Patreon, linked down below, you can really follow it in real time. The Holmes and Hoch tier, I'm kind of posting new findings and new research as I go, so you can actually watch this book in progress. It's a cool way to do it. I gotta inform my agent that I'm doing that tomorrow. So, all right, everybody, we're going to start out. February 1905, a train goes all the way from New York to Chicago, just as they did every day. Chugga, 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 woo, 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 woo. On board the train, Johann Hoch was granting an interview to Evelyn Campbell, a Chicago reporter who had been tracking him around Chicago for the past couple of weeks. After he was captured in New York, she had gone all the way up to New York with one of his wives that he had ditched so he could be identified. Now, this guy had been in the news in Chicago for a couple of several weeks. One of his recent wives in Chicago had died under somewhat mysterious circumstances, and as a massive manhunt was launched to find him, they realized that he had also married, deserted, and/or killed an awful lot of other people. By the time they caught him, he had already proposed to what they thought would have been wife number 55. I think really, if you take all the people he had been accused of, like accused enough that it made the papers, my count currently is at about 80. Now, of those, he actually married about 20, but there's also several others that he proposed to but didn't marry, and about 5 of them had died as well. Now, here's Hoch himself. It's kind of tricky to figure out the data here, because for one thing, a lot of the things that he was getting reported to have done were really somebody else. People couldn't really keep track of things. He was getting accused of being every guy who ever deserted a woman, which in this age of matrimonial agencies that were just easy prey for swindlers, it happened quite a bit. In fact, this is a picture he insisted on posing for when he got back to Chicago. These are all a bunch of people that he thought looked exactly like him. And frankly, some of the people that he did turn out to be being mistaken for looked less like him than the people in this picture. But he insisted on being taken to a barber, so they brought him out to a barber, and he insisted on posing with these people, and he told them, "You are all very lucky. The ladies can't resist you when they know you look like Johann Hoch." Of course, that's not quite how he would have said it. He would have said something more like, "The ladies can't resist you when they know you look like Johann Hoch." The guy, by all accounts, talked like a German dialect comedian, at least at this point. And it's something I notice in the anecdotes about him when he was running pubs and working at the Pullman shops and marrying woman after woman. Nobody ever talks about how funny he was. After he was captured, it was all that they talked about. Before that, they talked about his skills as a singer, as a musician, but almost never humor. People weren't necessarily looking for humor in the guy that they married just to have some money. That was really his technique. Find out what they want, be that guy for a month. But wait, the worst is yet to come. So we're going to start out here, tracing his career in Chicago. Well, this is really the place that he got in trouble. This is on Willow Street, just a couple of blocks from where we were on the morning mini tour the other day. When on, I think it was Wednesday when we went down to Lincoln Park to see that cool street, Crilly Court. But right about here, there was a candy store operated by a woman by the name of Marie Walker, who had just moved to the United States from Germany along with 2 of her sisters a few years before. She was a widow. Hoch looked about like this at the time, and had just got himself a house down here at Union Avenue, which would have been really right across the street from the Disco Salad Bar. The Disco Salad Bar, unfortunately for him, was not there yet, but it would have been in this little high school area where the field for the school is now. But right about here, he had built himself a cottage, or bought himself a cottage. And once he was established there, he put a matrimonial ad in the Abendpost, the Chicago Evening Post in German, that said, "Hey, I'm a wealthy widow, no kids, early 30s, looking for a wife." So I believe it was Marie's sister who actually answered the ad on her behalf, saying, "Yeah, come meet my sister. She's got this candy store. She's looking for a husband." Now, Marie really should have noticed immediately once he showed up that this guy was not like his ad. He said that he was in his early 30s in the ad. Really, he was 42. He's the same age that I am now in this shot. But looked about 10 years older. He frequently added a few years onto his age in marriage records. One thing I noticed in his marriage records, he's completely arbitrary with how old he says he is. Within 5 or 10 years either way of his actual age. So he married Marie, who is presently buried down here at Oakwood Cemetery. This very shortly after the wedding, they just talked for about half an hour. He said, "I like you, you like me, we can get married then, yeah?" He had her sell the candy store, had her withdraw all of her money and give it to him, which was a harder process than people tend to think it was. People tend to think once you married somebody, you automatically had access to all their bank accounts. It took some doing sometimes for him. But she started getting sick very shortly thereafter, and about 6 weeks later, in January of 1905, she died. The official cause of death was kidney failure. While her body was still laid out in the parlor, Hoch proposed to her sister, Emily. It took a little bit of persuasion, but Emily said yes. He married Emily the day after the funeral, and the day after that, he disappeared with all of her money. Now, it was really the newspapers that found out what was going on here. The Chicago American, the guy who ran that, made a point of checking over the vital records, just, checking out for stories. They had a whole network. Like, half of the people who worked in the coroner's office were on retainer for the Chicago American. If they noticed a good story, they'd get a little bonus if they called it into the American before anybody else. So they got wind that something was happening here, went to see this Emily Fisher person, and found out not only that the guy had already deserted her, but also that she was starting to suspect that maybe he had killed her sister. So the police got involved immediately, and Marie's body was exhumed from Oakwood Cemetery in late January of 1905. Now, we need to cover a little bit about what reporters were like here at the time. Well, first, we'll talk a little bit about the police that they got involved. The chief of police at the time, we've seen his grave many times, Francis O'Neill, who was really better remembered today for his contributions to preserving Irish folk music than for anything to do with his police work. Now, he was an immigrant himself. He had come over from Ireland, where he had been raised relatively well-to-do by potato famine-era standards. Now, in Chicago, as chief of police, he was probably the most qualified chief of police they had had in decades. He'd been a cop for years before he became chief. Usually they brought people in with no experience whatsoever to use chief as an entirely political appointment. Better than most of them, but still a really big supporter of the process of torturing people to get confessions out of them, which was only too popular with his inspector at the time, Inspector George M. Shippey, who would later become chief of police himself. And frankly, it's not an exaggeration to say that this guy was a total nut. There's stories after stories of him like renting horses thinking they would turn out to be magical and help him solve crimes. But this is what newspapers had looked like in 1895 during the investigation of the H.H. Holmes Castle. Here's what they looked like now at the time of the Hoch trials. The fonts had gotten a lot bigger, and more importantly, they had started between 1895 and 1905, they had perfected the halftone process that allowed them to use photographs. I never see photographs in an 1895 paper. You see, randomly, you'll see them occasionally in stuff from a couple of years later, but in 1902, when William Randolph Hearst expanded from San Francisco to New York and then into Chicago around 1904, all of a sudden things had gotten a lot more illustrated. He had personally pushed to get more photos in papers, so you start seeing things like this with much larger fonts too. They never got this big in 1897. Never this big of a picture, certainly never this big of a font. Now, the Chicago American was known for publishing any rumor they could dream up. But, like a lot of places, there's any number of modern comparisons you could make, places that seem like absolute garbage websites full of quizzes to tell you which Friends character you are, but those garbage quizzes are paying for the best investigative journalism departments in the business. Now, Hearst was also a bit of a pioneer. We tend to associate him now with nothing but exaggeration and nonsense and yellow journalism, and he was fighting against that by 1905 for sure. But also, he did have the best investigative journalism department. His papers would bring in experts more than the police would, and also he was a real pioneer in hiring women. Now, all throughout the 1880s and 1890s, there had been a lot of women doing what they called stunt reporting, like when Nellie Bly got herself committed to an asylum so she could report on what it was like in the asylum. That was kind of out of fashion after the Spanish-American War in 1898. But after that, there was this period where women were not really writing for papers. It was kind of thought to be a man's job again with the war and all. But by the next decade, by 1905, there were more women than men with bylines in newspapers, and they weren't just doing stunts. They weren't calling them our girl reporter or anything. They'd come up with some derogatory names pretty soon. But there was this one era right around here where they were not really treated as stunts. Now, up here in Lincoln Park is the Brewster Apartment Building. Classic building. Very stylish at the time. It would have been really fairly new in 1905. And this was the home of Evelyn Campbell, real name Nana Springer, who had been writing for the American for a couple of years as what was called a space writer. Like one day she'd be covering a murder trial, next day she'd be interviewing the murderer's wife, and the next day she'd be talking about how to trim a hat. You never knew what she'd be writing about from day to day, but she got really interested in the Hoch case. And they started publishing clues, publishing interviews with people, publishing exposés of the matrimonial agencies. And pretty soon the newspaper was saying, "Are you following Miss Campbell's Hoch clues? The detectives are." Well, they started to piece together the story of Johann Hoch. We covered some of this just yesterday. We went all through. In Wheeling, West Virginia, Hoch arrived under the name Jacob Huff back in January of 1895. Now, tantalizingly, when he left, he was under his real name, Jacob Schmidt. He had left Germany on a steamship called the Stuttgart. There was also a guy listed as departing that week named Jacob Huff, and somebody named Jacob plus Hoch's original wife's maiden name. These are all these tantalizing clues as to where he might have gotten his name, but not enough information to know for sure. But here there was a woman by the name of Carolyn Hoch living. Her husband Adolf had just died a few years ago, allegedly from having been drinking ice water. The cause of death in the record says heart failure, but all the newspaper articles that talked about him said it was because he had gotten too hot and drank ice water, which does occasionally kill people if they're dehydrated or something, though in those days they thought it was very, very common to die of drinking ice water when you were hot. Really, it was kind of an excuse to say, well, I shouldn't be drinking water. I should just have beer. Nice, safe, healthy beer. He died in 1892. Now, wasn't one thing, he was only sick for about 2 hours. He drank ice water one day. The next morning, about 4 o'clock, he got really, really sick, and he was dead by 6 a.m. So it would have taken a while. They had to bring in some doctors. So in that brief period he had about a 45-minute window to have written out this will. A fairly elaborate will that was signed with an X. I really, really doubt that he actually had anything to do with this will himself. It was probably just something the Justice of the Peace scribbled down himself to make sure that the widow was taken care of, but nobody would have really objected to that. Now, Hoch arrived about 2 years later. He showed up in January of 1905 and told everybody around Wheeling when he started up his saloon that he had been on a ship called the Elbe. The Elbe was a German steamer that had been collided with in late January, 30 miles off of the Hoch of Holland. Killed about 300 people. There were only 20 survivors. It was absolutely impossible for Hoch to be one of them. He would have been by the time when he first bought his saloon, the thing had only gone down for a couple of days. There's no way he could have even made it in time, but nobody really had a way to fact check him. Even if they happened to have copies of the Wheeling Register still sitting around from a month ago, they never published the list of survivors of the Elbe in the Wheeling Register. They did publish thrilling accounts of the sinking, but nothing specific. So Hoch started up this saloon and started telling people, I'm looking for somebody to marry. A few people suggested Carolyn Hoch, that widow. So he talked to her, they got married, and within days after that, Reverend Haas was called to the house, the guy who had done the wedding ceremony, and whose church Carolyn and Mr. Huff became members of, and he said he's got the distinct impression that she was being poisoned. He brought in a doctor, and the doctor said, I'm not having anything to do with this case. This is just too fishy. I don't want to get mixed up in it. He also said, I could tell right away there was something wrong with this Huff character. I didn't like his eyes. Which is really awfully bigoted for a preacher to say. But then Carolyn died in June, just about 2 months after the wedding. She was buried within about 18 hours of having died. And Haas said that Hoch made a big deal out of kissing the corpse, but he could tell right away the whole thing was fake. A few days later, Reverend Haas started going around the drugstores trying to find out exactly what kind of medicines this Jacob Huff character had been buying. Now, Hoch, for his part, had been going around telling everybody he was going to take all this money he inherited and make a giant, concert hall and beer hall, big German bands and everything. Everybody now knew that he was a big musician. Reverend Haas said he was great at the zither. But he also started to realize that Haas was onto him. One day, Haas was having dinner and heard a noise up in his bedroom, so he went up thinking there was going to be a burglar. But instead, it was Johann Hoch. And Hoch said, oh, sorry, I was just looking for you, and then kind of slinked back like Homer into the bushes. Haas immediately threw away all of his medicines, thinking they might have been tampered with, though he later realized he should have just had somebody analyze them. The next morning, Hoch's clothing was found on the banks of the Ohio River about a block from his saloon. It looked as though he had committed suicide by stripping naked and walking into the river. But as the newspapers said, it deceived nobody. So Reverend Haas began trying to put together data about the guy. He sent a picture back to the hometown that he had mentioned in Germany, and eventually they put the pieces together, found out this was a guy born in Horweiler, a very small town in Germany back in 1862, parents Adam Schmidt and Elizabeth Weber Schmidt, and that's actually a very good clue. There's an awful lot of weddings where Hoch was asked to give his parents' names, and he usually told the truth about his parents' names. It's rumor had it that he had a woman named Anna Hoch back in Germany, or possibly in Vienna, or possibly a woman named Christine Philippine Ram. Horweiler was a very small town, and getting records from there was really, really difficult. But having disappeared, he moved to Chicago, started up a saloon where he spent most of his time telling his patrons how easy it was to trick women and how great he was at chemistry. Not suspicious at all. Then told a guy named Benno Lechner that he was looking to get married, and Benno said, "Hey, have you thought about that widow across the street? She's rich." That was all that Hoch needed to hear. So, over here at Milwaukee and Western, he was operating a saloon, married a woman by the name of Marie or Julia Steinbrecher. Now, like a lot of them, she has 3 different first names and 4 different last names, each of which is spelled 9 different ways. It can be really frustrating researching these people. But he moved her into a place on Belmont. Kind of spinning around to it from here. This was the month that my phone camera needed a new lens. There's something wrong with it. Everything came in way too washed out. Would have been about right to the left of these places. But she started to take sick immediately as well and told Mr. Lechner and her maid and her son and her daughter-in-law that she was being poisoned. But they didn't really have any evidence of that one way or another. Benno Lechner, the Hoch's friend who was best man at the wedding, got suspicious and came in and made a big show of trying to drink some of the wine that was sitting out, but Hoch smacked it out of his hand and said, "No, that's the medicine. That's not for you. Don't drink that." Which seemed awfully suspicious. Now, the only person who seemed to go along with it was Annie, the maid, who later sued Hoch for breach of promise. Apparently, he had told her, "This woman is sick. She's going to die. Then I'm going to marry you, and all this will be yours." And the maid went right along with it. But just down the road was the Kraups Funeral Home, which stood right about here. Once again, the funeral was almost immediately after Maria died. And somebody tried to stop up the funeral procession as they went out to Graceland Cemetery. A person had come to try to get Hoch to pay a bill and said, "Wait a minute, you can't bury this woman. She died of being poisoned." But Hoch showed up with a death certificate signed by a guy named Dr. Grimm, of all names, that said that she had died of gastritis. Though incidentally, up at Graceland Cemetery, the burial record here says that she died of diabetes. In any case, she's up here in the corner in an unmarked grave. The records, we're having trouble in the records finding out what kind of casket or burial vault she's in. But if she's in a vault, the murder weapon, the arsenic Hoch had probably given her, would have been right there. It's still right there. Because arsenic is an element. It doesn't decompose down to anything else. But it would be difficult to tell because arsenic was usually an embalming fluid in those days. Even if they had exhumed Maria, they would have found plenty of arsenic, but not any way to actually connect Johann Hoch to having done it. Now, this time, Hoch stuck around Chicago, started going to matrimonial agencies looking for other people to marry. And within a month of Maria dying, he had married Minnie Rankin, who herself was also a bigamist. She was married to a couple other people already and had never gotten a divorce. Met him through a matrimonial agency and really seems as though she were trying to swindle him. She moved him into her house over here and he started saying, "Hey, give me all your money," even apparently held a gun to her chest. And she would just laugh and say, "No, you can't have my money. I'm trying to get your money." This marriage only lasted a couple of days. She herself had been accused of murder once or twice. I really think in just about every transaction with a matrimonial agency, at least one party was a swindler. It stands to reason that every now and then, both parties would have been trying to swindle each other. So Hoch, having left her, married another woman who lived right about where the Portillo's is now, over in River North. Left her and having swindled both her and her sister, went off to Cincinnati for a while, married a couple of women there, changed his name to Fred Dess, married a few other women around Chicago, Milwaukee, and New York, then eventually spent a couple of years in jail. After he spent a couple of years in jail and making the news for having married so many people, he was released and got a job working in the Pullman shops. Now, there's about a year and a half period where he doesn't really show up in the record much. He got out of jail and seems to have spent the next year and a couple of months just working his job. There's not even that many accusations of him having married people during this period. But eventually, he came up to Eugenie Street, where we were just the other day for the morning mini tour. Now I can see exactly which house it was after all. I thought it was this one. Where he went up to this house that was operated by a boarding house operated by a woman by the name of Mary Gerke. And he lived there for a while, then eventually proposed to Miss Gerke. And she said, okay, the two of them got married, and Hoch moved in along with his trunk full of stuff. Now, inside of this trunk, they found books about hypnotism and a mail-order course for how to become a hypnotist, plus a diploma saying that he had graduated from the Hypnotism Academy. Now, let me just show you a couple of gifs to illustrate how newspapers at the time reacted when they found evidence that this guy was a hypnotist. Now, they could have so much fun with a story like this. And a lot of people started coming up saying, yes, I did marry him, and I believe he hypnotized me. Maybe he hypnotized me with his zither playing. Which just kind of made sense at the time. I think it made a lot of people feel better that he must have hypnotized them. No, it's not my fault that I married a guy I just met who then swindled me and took all of my money. He hypnotized me. It wasn't my fault. So we started seeing articles and more articles like this. Hoch a hypnotist, 26 wives now, trunk containing clues in woman's possession. Or here he is using his laser vision on a woman who looks exactly like Evelyn Campbell. Now, he married and deserted Mary Gerke. She started getting sick, and he said, oh, I'll take care of you. Let me bring you some medicine. She said, nope, I'm going to the hospital. At that point, he just decided to cut his losses and simply leave. He went to St. Louis for a while, married a woman there, and really almost seemed like he was trying to straighten up and fly right for about a year, around 1902 and 1903. Went to St. Louis, got a job working as a tinsmith, told a lot of big stories about how he was a military hero and stuff, and it was kind of a running joke among the other employees, Mr. Schmidt's big stories. But he was living under his own name, about half the time anyway, and married to a woman who stayed alive for nearly a year. But then he moved back to Pullman. 1904, well, he spent some time in San Francisco, married a woman and deserted her there. Also a woman in Baltimore for a while. I may be a bit confused on the timeline there. Putting the timeline together has been a major chore. But right over here, about where I was parked this day when I was filming, is this house right behind my car where I just happened to be parked. I didn't realize at the time that I parked there that this was where Johann Hoch lived. Here's a picture by Kristen. So while he was here, I was courting by mail a couple of different women. One, a woman named Woman Podolsky, who he proposed to but never married, and a woman named Anna Hendricks. Now, Anna Hendricks, he took to Hammond, Indiana to marry under pretty much his real name, John Jacob Schmidt. His name is my name, too. He told her, I'm going to get rich one of these days. One day my father in Germany will die and I'll inherit all of his money. About a week after the wedding, he said, it's happened. I've got the telegram. I have to go to Germany. Can you give me some money so I can get to Germany? So she gave him enough money to take a trip to Germany, and he just disappeared. He spent the next year around New York and Chicago doing pretty much the same schemes, but then eventually was caught after having deserted Emily Fisher Hoch. There was about a 10-day manhunt while police gathered all of these stories. And then finally he was caught in New York. Now he was staying around the Hell's Kitchen neighborhood in a boarding house occupied by a woman named Catherine Kimmerell. Now, Kimmerell, his landlady, said he was always very helpful, always offering to help peel the potatoes and stuff. Then started saying things like, if you were married to me, you'd never have to peel a potato again. This was one of the danglers that Hoch would use. Like when he married Anna Hendricks, he immediately smashed up her wash tub, saying, you won't be needing this anymore, somebody else is going to do the washing from now on. But Catherine had been reading the newspapers, reading all about that awful man in Chicago, and realized right away that was the guy who was here. So she went straight to the police, who knocked at the door and said, hello, Johann Hoch. And he said, oh, hello, how are you? I mean, wait a minute, I'm not Johann Hoch. This is the thing. One of the ways that we can kind of catch and separate fact from fiction is Hoch slipped up a lot. He was very easy to trick into admitting some of these marriages, and the ones that he really didn't do, he got particularly indignant and excited about, writing letter after letter. But they went digging through his stuff and found a pen that contained a quantity of arsenic. Now, what kind of man carries around a pen loaded with arsenic? And he said it was going to be for suicide, but nobody exactly believed that. Why would you have to hide it in a pen if you were going to use it on yourself? Meanwhile, back in Chicago, they gathered up Mary Gerke, Anna Hendricks, and Emily Fisher, who had a big meeting for the first time at an inquest and sat around saying, well, I never. They all got along reasonably well, at least until they had to start thinking about who's going to get all of this guy's money, who's going to get paid back first. Then there started being some drama. Here's Mary when she was younger. Minnie Rankin would join them later on. But Evelyn Campbell, the reporter, took Anna Hendricks to New York where she identified him. They came up to him in the prison cell, they put him in a lineup, and she walked right up to him and said, hello, John. And he said, I'm sorry, Mary. I mean, no, who are you? I've never seen you before. So after a few days, he was extradited back to New York. Evelyn Campbell interviewed him on the train the whole way back, and he said, aren't you afraid I'm going to propose to you? Don't I propose to everyone? And here we can see an interesting illustration of how they did pictures at the time. Is they couldn't necessarily get a legible photo, so they would do a lot of composites, a lot of pasting people's heads onto drawings. Or sometimes they'd just do the whole drawing, too. It probably would have been really hard to get a picture on a moving train in those days. Things just wouldn't really stay still well enough. So Evelyn gave him a good interview, tried to slip him up into admitting things, worked a little bit, but mostly he just said, this is all chew the rag talk. I'm just going back to clear my name. I'll maybe admit that I was a bigamist only because I thought I was divorced from Anna Hendricks. Turns out I really wasn't, but it was all that rascally lawyer. We'll clear all of this up. He was laughing and jovial and cracking jokes the entire time. People thought it was like watching a comedian. But he had no reason, honestly, to be that jovial, because even frankly, if he had been innocent, the police and the coroner had already said that he wasn't. They would have stopped at nothing to convict this guy, even if it turned out that he was, in fact, entirely innocent. But they took him to the criminal court building, the old jail, where one by one they brought in these various wives to identify him. He said, Minnie, I remember you, but you're a bigamist too, so I better not say anything. Mary, he said, listen, Gerke, you're the one who's been spreading all this stuff about hypnotism. You made me take those courses. And Emily, he said, don't worry, I'll give you your money back. That calmed her down a lot. She eventually went on tour. She became a museum attraction. They called it the Congress of the Wives of Johann Hoch. She appeared in Chicago, New York, and Joliet, really just sitting there so people could make fun of her. She told Evelyn Campbell that she hated it. It was even worse than housework, but she kept on doing it in city after city. Hoch became very popular in the jail. Jailer Whitman absolutely believed that Hoch was completely innocent and bent over backwards, eventually trying to save his neck. And people noticed a lot. He was a man of many moods. He would swing back and forth from one to the other. The lawyer who prosecuted him believed that he was what we would now call schizophrenic. Nobody actually diagnosed him with that at the time, though. But he was also taken out to get his picture taken, posed with anybody else with a mustache he could find. Here he is with Detective Loftus, Coroner Hoffman, who would later be sheriff and later go to jail himself, and Inspector Shippey, who would later end up in an asylum himself. But everywhere he went, people would shout. People would send him valentines occasionally. People talked about all the ways that he was able to do this, all the ways it had to be charming them with the zither. It just had to be the zither. So the trial was fairly uneventful. They just went through all of the stories. They went through all of the stories about what had happened to Marie Walker. Emily Fisher Hoch was the star witness. Now, really what it turned out was the initial autopsies were a little bit unclear. They found like a little bit of arsenic, but not the kind that would kill a person. There was even an indication that it might have been added to the stomach after death, which is the kind of thing that the police might have done. Coroner Hoffman absolutely would not have been above planting arsenic into the body, but really when you read through the trial transcript, the impression I get is it's not the way they expected to find it, because they were looking for arsenic that would have been ingested through the mouth. It had actually been administered via enemas. But Hoch was eventually sentenced to be hanged. But he was nearly hanged 3 times. He was, June, a month after the trial, he was brought out and reprieved at the last second. And a month after that, once again, he was reprieved at the last second. He had just given an interview to another newspaper writer named Jean Cowgill, who came away convinced that he was probably innocent. Right after he was saved again, she apparently put up some of the money herself. And not only did she put up the money, but... let's move back here a little. But she convinced him to take on her boyfriend, Frank Comerford, who would later be a judge in a lot of the cases we talk about in the 1920s, to hire Hoch, you can persuaded Hoch to hire Comerford as his new lawyer. So 3 times over the course of 1905, he was in the death cell, ready to go. They'd built the gallows, had everything ready to hang him, but he would get reprieved right at the last second. And even on the very last time, when the Supreme Court had finally ruled against him and he was definitely going to have to hang, Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis all of a sudden said, yeah, we can delay this again. But hold on a second, just go get me the paperwork. They went to get the paperwork, and when they came back, Judge Landis had gone to lunch. Landis was nothing if not unpredictable. Later, he would become the commissioner of baseball. He's the guy who banned shoeless Joe Jackson from playing baseball ever again after the Black Sox scandal. Nothing if not unpredictable. But the paperwork just didn't go through in time, so Hoch was eventually hanged in February of 1906. Initially, even people who absolutely believed he was guilty thought it was absolutely horrible that they were hanging him the previous summer. Because the governor admitted if he had $600 to launch a Supreme Court bid, I wouldn't hang him today. But he doesn't have $600, so we got to hang him. Now, everybody kind of admitted it's a terrible thing to hang somebody just because they don't have the money for an appeal. But he pushed the appeal as far as it possibly could go. And the Chicago American in those days, this is their 12 o'clock edition. They knew that the Johann Hoch has been hanged issue was going to be a really big seller. But then, after he had been dressed for president and everything, and they'd written out all the versions that would be mailed out to outlying towns, they got word about Kennesaw Mountain Landis delaying things. So this became kind of a legend among newspaper writers, all the hoops they jumped through trying to change the headlines constantly, hour after hour. Now, during the Spanish-American War, they had been putting out like 24 editions a day of some of these papers, or at least the New York paper that Hearst was running at the time. But they would, any tiny bit of news, there's the afternoon edition. There's another afternoon edition, as Hoch prays as the jailers test gallows. Ask U.S. Court to stop hanging. Extra, extra. Extra! Finally, Hoch hanged. So Hoch was hanged February of 1906. Initially buried at Dunning Cemetery, as nobody else would take him. But a couple of days later, well, initially he was here at Dunning. But a couple of days later, they found a cemetery out in Riverside, in Elmwood Cemetery that would take him. So he is somewhere in this section. I couldn't figure out exactly where he was. They couldn't give me a specific enough map that would show it. It's certainly unmarked. Or if it is a marker, I couldn't find it anywhere. But somewhere over here in Elmwood lies Johann Hoch. So, all right, that's kind of me giving myself a crash course here because I've been working on the book on these things all week. Right now, I am on the Julia Steinbrecher chapter, who was also known as Marie Steinbrecher, Marie Cohn, Julia, Maria, Steinbucher, Steinbrecher, Steinbücher. So many different ones. But all right, I'm still way behind on getting upcoming tours up. You know, we do these morning mini tours every day with a full-length one on Sunday mornings and Thursday nights. I'm just a little bit behind. I'm also, I got to do all the Patreon posts for this week, either this afternoon or this morning or tomorrow morning before they go out. But, so with that, everybody, I don't really have anything to plug right now, other than the Patreon. So I will just put up the thanks screen where if anybody wants to kick in on Venmo, PayPal, or joining the Patreon, that's all the links are right there. We'll put the Benny Goodman back on and just hang out on this lovely Sunday morning. Here's Benny. Oh, and let me show you this record I happened to come across yesterday. After the War of 1812, the United States refused a bounty land request for Captain Hook. So this may be another source of our national woes. Not like we don't have a lot to atone for, but a pirate curse can't be helping. Thank you, Heather. See, Marcus, for a friend, they go easier on me tax-wise. Thank you, Gail. There's I haven't found the photograph version of this. I do have a photo of him with a beard, but it's not quite like this one. I wish I could find this one someplace. I've also got people in Springfield digging and digging trying to find his clemency files. He's got to have a clemency file. Unless it got moldy and thrown away years and years ago, which is possible. Or vermin infested, that can happen too. But there are references in the press to having like 400 pages worth of affidavits and stuff. Emily Fisher took back her whole testimony. She said the cops forced her to do that, which is exactly the kind of thing they would have done. Not that I think he was innocent, but the guy definitely did not get a fair trial. About as fair as it got. Oh, yeah, thank you over on YouTube. Yeah, we had a great Thanksgiving. If you're on the Patreon, you get a lot of extra content. There's every Monday is a Chicago history story. Thursday, for the deep research tier, there will be even more stuff about that. Wednesdays is a coyote in a cemetery picture. I'm going to go head out and get some more of those in just a moment here. And then Friday is the Holmes, Hoch and Friends tier, where I post stuff from my archives about H.H. Holmes and Johann Hoch, and there's a lot of stuff on both of those. And especially on that tier right now, you can really kind of follow along the research on the Johann Hoch book as it is in progress. Never done a book where you could monitor like that before. So that's kind of neat. But also there's the tour tier where you get free tour tickets every month, but which actually happens to be the cost per month. So that's definitely your best bargain. You also get all the stuff on the other tiers as well. Susan, I had to go through some real initiation stuff to get a members-only jacket. I'm not allowed to talk about it, obviously. Let's just say I now know the Whip and Poof song really well. One of the most entertaining entries in Bob Dylan's new book is writing about the Whip and Poof song, which is poor little lambs who've lost our way, ba, ba, ba. They're a glee club at Yale. But really, in his essay about it, he's really clearly writing about Skull and Bones, the other secret society at Yale. Yeah, guys, this is how historians dress now. Like 1980s pop stars. Early 80s. Miles and Priya are still hanging out on the couches over here. There's Priya, there's Miles. Hey, Priya. With some pets. Miles, you too, of course. You gotta make your appearance. You being a diva today, Miles? Is that what you're doing? Looking the other way? Make it a great day, Lisa. Hey guys, you only have a week to see Glass Onion 2, the new Knives Out movie, which was just delightful and really meant to be seen in a theater. Cinematically, I don't know, but it's just seeing with the crowd to laugh at its ridiculousness, its outrageousness, the slapstick, and to watch as the pieces of a murder mystery come together. Okay, Miles. Here you are, huh? Coming here to do your duty. Here, is this what you want? Fine. Such a stage parent, Dad. I enjoyed the hell out of Glass Onion. Not least because one of the menagerie of eccentric characters that populate all good mysteries, is basically an Elon Musk knockoff, and they have great fun pointing out what an idiot he really is. Feels remarkably timely this week. Hey! Any time of day. Alright, McGinnis. Catch your trouble by the toe. If it hollers, let it go, let it fly away. The saying high and low, hear it everywhere you go, any time of day. Valley sings it, Wiseman rings it, even Mr. Crosby sings it. Let it fly away. Oh, Susan, that's a shame. People were people applauded at the end in my theater. A lot of laugh out loud moments in it, but you know, it's a perfectly good mystery. Normally, I like big old houses more than island retreats. What it reminded me of most, honestly, was Cat's Cradle by Vonnegut. It's a weird island full of strange, eccentric people, plus there's a religion where they all worship bullshit and a mysterious volatile substance. Only Baconanism, the bullshit is admitted. This is more like Elon-type bullshit.
Benny Goodman's Orchestra and the King Porter's Stomp.
Alright, yeah, keep on getting better, Bob. Octavio, feeling it. And awesome. Joining the Patreon is one of the best ways to contribute around here. Am I going to travel for the holidays? Not really, probably. Laura, yeah, Glass Onion is the new Knives Out movie. It's the same Daniel Craig character. Plus cameos by some really interesting, from really fun people. And yeah, I loved Knives Out. I references it quite a bit when I'm telling stories about the reading of the will, which is like exactly how it happened. You know, the one with Charles J. Hull at Roselle Cemetery. The reading of his will is the kind of thing that never happens in real life, except that it did with him, almost exactly like it goes down in Knives Out. All the relatives gathered around, knives out, beaks bloody. But yeah, the Glass Onion is only in theaters for like a week, and it's going to go to streaming next month. I also heartily recommend the Wednesday Addams series on Netflix. Loved it. Jenna Ortega is a fantastic Wednesday. I figured out the ending way too early, but that's not why you watch it. We're gonna let Benny finish up this tune, and I'm off to bring the camera out to Graceland. See if the coyotes are active today. Octavio, have you not seen Knives Out, the movie that Rian Johnson did right after Last Jedi? Which I personally I am a Last Jedi supporter. Generally, I skip over the scenes that aren't Luke, Rey, and Kylo, but those scenes are fantastic. No, Kathleen, you do not need to have seen Knives Out to see Glass Onion. It's a totally different story. The detective is the same guy, but it doesn't. The one does not build on the other even slightly. But all right, that is Benny wrapping up, so it is time for me to wrap up as well. That's kind of forgot I got the whole playlist here. I'm just using it in my old Apple Music folder instead of on archive.org. But all right, thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. We will be back tomorrow morning with Mural Monday, just like every Monday. So thanks a lot. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago Tours. Thanks to everybody who's been kicking in on the donate buttons there. And until tomorrow morning, everybody stay warm, stay dry, keep eating those leftovers. Go see a Glass Onion while you can. But of course, everybody, it'll help you to stay spooky.